This is All Things Reconsidered. Eric Kirk with you on this nice Thursday night. My guest tonight is Andy Caffrey. He is running for Congress. Although he lives local, he will explain, I believe, that he has contacts up and down the coast and has roots up and down the coast, and is running. Although he's running as a Green, as we'll explain, that's not going to matter so much in terms of the primary this time around. Everybody's running against everybody in what's called the open primary. I didn't vote for it, but it passed, and it may or may not give third-party candidates a better chance. I guess we'll find out. But Andy, welcome, and you would like to introduce yourself. I think a lot of people locally know you, but there may be people who aren't local listening as well, and maybe explain why you're running for Congress.
Well, that's quite a single question. Good evening, Eric, and hi, everybody. It's nice to be here. Well, I guess the first place to start is with me as a person, and I'm 54 years old. I was born in 1957, which coincidentally was the year that they started measuring greenhouse gas concentrations at Mauna Loa, Hawaii. Roger Revelle, Al Gore's favorite professor, who also coincidentally I would end up having. He's the guy who I learned about global warming from in 1979 while I was an undergraduate. But I grew up in the 60s, and I watched all kinds of horrors. I watched the Vietnam War every night at dinner. We'd see these body bags coming back, and there'd be a tally of how many Viet Cong, how many South Vietnamese, and how many American troops had died that day. And while it was horrible how many American troops had died, it was almost always about 20-1 North Vietnamese dead to American dead. So I was also responding to this incredible genocide that was occurring there. But I mostly responded to environmental issues. And probably the one that really grabbed me the most was the Santa Barbara oil spill. And that was because my favorite uncle, my Uncle Ben, worked in accounting. He managed the accounting department at the oil company that had caused it. And he was such a wonderful guy. I knew it was a very painful thing for him. So I saw that, and I saw the Cuyahoga River catch on fire. And then there were girls born around the same time I was who were sterilized by DES, which was a hormone that was given to pregnant mothers to ease their pregnancy. And a number of, horrors that I don't have to recount, but I responded to them. And one day I turned to my mom and said, I think I'm a white blood cell of the earth. And later on, as I grew older, I got involved in special summer school classes on inshore marine biology, and then I became a TA the following year. And I went off to Annapolis the following year, and that was only about 5 weeks long because when I got there, they told me they cut out the biology department because Congress had outlawed the pre-med program, and that was the only one that they felt needed biology. So I resigned and went on to UCSD, which has a graduate school called the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and that was actually my first choice because Scripps is probably the most prestigious oceanographic institution in the world, and it's always been at the forefront of this climate research. So there I had Michael Soule, the conservation biology professor, who later inspired Dave Foreman and a lot of people in Earth First and the whole conservation biology movement, in which college professors got off their duff and said, hey, we've got to take this knowledge that we've got and do something with it in society. And I got involved in Earth First in 1985. But before that, in 1979, I got involved in the first Green Party of the United States, the Citizens Party. We ran Barry Commoner, an environmentalist, for president, and LaDonna Harris.
1980?
Well, the election was 1980, but the founding was 1979,
Mm-hmm.
right? It was a 1980 election, the one that Reagan won. And that lasted for about 4 years. And then 1985, what we consider the modern Green Party movement began. It wasn't called the Green Party then. It was the East Bay Green Alliance, where I was involved in the Bay Area. And so my life has basically been one in which I responded to these crises. And as I've gotten older, I don't know, maybe this grandpa gene has kicked in, but I found myself doing a lot more person-to-person work and human-oriented things like my work with the homeless people and the disadvantaged in general. So I'm running for Congress because of what I've learned and studied and advocated about regarding the climate crisis for 30 years now, and how dire that situation is and how far off the mark everybody in politics is. There's not one person you can point to and say, hey, that's the David Brower of this movement. He's right on. So the reason I'm running is because I need to.
Right. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. 1957 was a landmark year in several respects. I believe that was Sputnik. Also, when we first sent advisors to Vietnam, that's when the Vietnam War for the United States actually got started. And also, it was the year that President Eisenhower, of all people, coined the term military-industrial complex. So you got a lot symbolic with that birth date.
But On the Road came out too.
Oh, that's true. On the Road came out. Spartacus was released, so which was the movie that broke the back of the blacklist. So a lot happened in 57. Well, we're talking about, of course, running for Congress, and that would, of course, be the 1st District. But the 1st District is, of course, changed, right?
Yeah, now we are, well, half of us are in the 2nd District, and I believe the other half, the southern and eastern part, is in the 5th District, and that's the one that Mike Thompson will run for re-election in.
Right. Mark Thompson, of course, no longer qualifies because he lives in Napa, which is now part of the 5th. So we are in the 2nd District now?
Yeah, the way it worked before, and the way it is like today, if you were to look on a map what the districts are, it starts at the Oregon border, and we have all of Del Norte, all of Humboldt, all of Mendocino, and then it cuts over kind of like a J, and we have the northeast corner of Sonoma County, and then Lake County, Napa County, and then this little semicircle of Yolo County, which includes UC Davis. Mm-hmm. So that was the 1st District, and in that district, which was a district I planned to run in, and I planned to run before the open primary, so I thought I was going to run against Mike Thompson in the Democratic primary and organize to get enough votes to defeat him there. But now, 2 things have changed. We have an open primary, which essentially obliterates all the things we think of as primaries. Nobody runs on a party ticket anymore. Everyone who wants to run in the general election runs. At the time, we have primary elections in June. It'll be June of next year, 2012.
And let's just be clear as to how it happens. You've got a list of candidates, and the top 2, if somebody gets over 50%, he or she wins, right? Otherwise, if there's a plurality, the top 2 candidates run against each other in November. But other than that, everybody is running against everybody, regardless of what party you're in.
Right, and we have such a unique district, the new district, which has lopped off those eastern counties. We still have Del Norte, Humboldt, Mendocino, and that northern part of Sonoma, but what's been added to it is the western part and southern part of Sonoma. In other words, it goes around Santa Rosa and gives Santa Rosa and everything east to Mike's district, and then we have all of Marin County. So it runs from the Oregon border down to the Golden Gate Bridge, and it's now, I think it's probably the most, by voters, progressive district in the country, because a month ago, when my consultants did an internal poll for us, we found that 59% of the voters in the new 2nd District, if they were to vote today, say they would vote for a Democratic candidate, and 19% a Republican, 4% for third party. But now it's gone up, so it's 62% Democratic and 15% Republicans. That's 4-1 Democrats to Republicans.
Maybe, although I think Barbara Lee's might still top us. I think she gets over 70% each time, but still, but it's a lot more progressive than it was, which opens up a slew of candidates vying for the progressive spot. I understand we have one Republican in the race. Other than that, it's all mostly Democrats and yourself. I guess it doesn't matter how we're registered anymore.
No, it doesn't, and it's a little unfortunate for me because, as you mentioned, my politics are entirely green. Having been involved in green politics for 30 years, I'm not abandoning that at all. My views are not any more liberal and less radical than they've been. I'm just taking this kind of politics and this look at our problems from a fundamental ecological point of view and bringing that kind of organizing into the Democratic Party grassroots movement, because I think now, 30 years later, Democrats are more than ready to hear what we talked about back in 1979, 1980.
Okay, I'm speaking to Andy Caffrey. He is running for Congress in what is now the 2nd California Congressional District, and we're discussing some of the dynamics of the election. But before we go on to that, you've mentioned global warming, environmental issues. You've touched on some being opposed to all or most wars that we tend to find ourselves getting into. Other issues which go to your heart, which will be prominent in your campaign?
Well, unlike most candidates and most politicians, they're talking about how we are going into perhaps a double-dip recession, but they aren't adding into the equation things like the climate crisis requiring us to radically reduce our fossil fuel emissions, and they aren't talking about peak oil, and they aren't talking about all the other ecological limits we're at. We use, well, this is an old figure, about 15, 20 years ago, we were using half of the biomass of the planet for humanity. So less than half of it was in a sort of wild state operating as it should. Imagine a body that's so artificial that half of the body is artificial. Well, no one can convince me that that's a sustainable way of maintaining a planet. So the ecological crisis is really what we have to deal with. And that's what I invite people to think about regarding my campaign. Start with, what are the things that when we look around the world, look at things ecologically and look at things socially, politically, economically, what are the things that really have to be done? And to that end, I put together a set of essentially 7 proposals that deal with those fundamental issues. And the first is a climate crisis. The second is that we have to basically build the post-fossil fuel, post-nuclear economic infrastructure right now. And we have to do it with the same urgency that we responded to World War II. So it's a war effort. I'm calling on President Obama to declare a national climate emergency and to organize the country in a similar way to how we responded to World War II. That is a pretty involved project, and we can talk about that in some detail, but that's fundamentally the second point of how I think we should deal with the economy. We can't just tweak it. We have to rebuild it now, and we need a national effort that's funded fully funded as the bank bailouts, as fully funded, well, it's not really funded, the $3 trillion war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan. The third one is we have to retreat the empire. I think most Americans believe that really our defense is to protect Americans, their lives, and their property here in the U.S., not to protect spheres of influence for corporations in 150 nations around the world. And that, of course, is one major place where we can get the money. The other is to tax the rich, which is part of the conversion. The fourth one is ending corporate personhood. The fifth one is to prosecute the Bush administration and other war criminals in our government. I've been really upset ever since Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon. And that let Nixon walk, and when that happened, when Reagan went and did Iran-Contra and waged these hideous genocidal wars in Central America that I spent the 80s fighting, Reagan was able to say, oh, I take full responsibility. But he didn't have to do anything to take responsibility. All he had to do was say it. And then it goes on, and we get George W. Bush, and everyone just sits and lets the Supreme Court overthrow the presidency of the United States. And everyone, just like in the story, The Emperor's New Clothes, just keeps on talking about how this guy's a president or how he's dressed. So I think the only way to stop that is to go after them now. As a congressman, I can start to impeach the Supreme Court justices who are still on the Supreme Court who were involved in imposing Bush on us. So I would go after those 3, and then Sandra Day O'Connor, who's the 4th. And however far I can go with that as, a single congressman and what I can organize, we can certainly make a big show of it, just like the Tea Party, without having necessarily anybody elected, can make a big show of things. So that's the 5th one. 6th one is legalizing marijuana and ending the war on drugs, which is the 3rd source of funding, ending the war on drugs. And the last one is paper ballots and electoral reform. So those, I think, are the fundamental issues that if we could really get focused and deal with those, a lot of things would fall in place and we'd get balanced again.
All right. Why don't we talk briefly about something that has played out in my family in politics and progressive politics, and that is the problem that environmental green politics has run into over the years. And within my family, my communist grandfather used to become irate when my father took on environmental politics. My father, I guess you would say, is a product of the New Left that looked at a little bit broader. My grandfather being communist, and he would say outright, ecology is a bourgeois science, and he would refer to it as, and it's kind of an extreme version of the tension between people who are, let's say, working class, who are more concerned about jobs, immediate concerns such as paying their rent, feeding their kids and the rest, as opposed to what used to be considered long-term, maybe not so much long-term anymore, but long-term concerns and what they referred to as quality of life. How would you work, not just in your campaign, but as a congressman, the tension between sort of the red-green coalition of, or maybe the blue-green coalition of progressive politics? And you've probably worked with that in your life on a number of occasions. And it's just, how do you address those issues?
Well, you do it with an integrated approach. What I advocate is a process called the Great Conversion Conferences. Again, let's back up and start with, what do we actually have to accomplish? Forget politics. If we had no political barriers at all, and we could come together as a people and decide what we have to do now regarding the climate, as I've said, we have to reduce our emissions as fast as possible. And this argument is based on research going back to 1990. David Suzuki, the great Canadian scientist and activist, put out a book called It's a Matter of Survival in 1991, and in it he cited the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which has now won the Nobel Prize, the US EPA, and the Woods Hole Research Institute. They all came out with reports in 1990 saying that in order to stabilize the climate, we had to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions on the order of 55 to 80% below 1990 levels by the year 2000 to 2005. Well, we did nothing of the kind. In fact, President Obama is actually the first president to really pass anything specifically to deal with the climate crisis. Everyone else passed on it. So we still, as far as I'm concerned, have to meet that deadline. That's why we have to do it as fast as possible. And the simplest way to do that is to eliminate having to use these fuels for transportation for long distances. So the goal is an economic plan in which we come together on a bioregional basis. We come together in these conferences. We bring the climate crisis people, we bring the peak oil people, we bring the ecotopian visionaries, we bring agriculture and labor together to define what it is we are going to do to meet this reduction of fossil fuels target. And that requires us to assess sustainability by assessing the carrying capacity of bioregions. How else can you determine what is really sustainable except by ecosystem? What can an ecosystem handle versus another ecosystem? So the first part is to do this kind of bioregional carrying capacity assessment. And from that information, the community assesses how they can meet their needs as close to home as possible. The goal is to have most of what we need produced in our bioregion, but that's not possible in most places. So the second part is to get them from the neighboring bioregions. And so you go outward. It's not an absolute bioregional autonomy. It's just you move in that direction. So I'm proposing that we redirect trillions of dollars to all of our communities to start this process of evaluating how we can build a post-fossil fuel, post-nuclear infrastructure as fast as possible with this kind of war effort and the appropriate funding so that every region locally can design the kind of community it's going to have. And when you do that, a whole bunch of social problems disappear. First of all, most of the disenfranchised minorities are going to get the same kind of funding to design their communities as the most affluent white communities. So you have economic empowerment of minority communities. And this is not socialism. This is not a top-down planning that is done by the central government. The funding comes from the federal government. The funding comes from taxing the rich. The funding comes from ending the war on drugs. And the funding comes from retreating the empire. But we all design it locally. So it's very much pro-small business. It's very much pro-labor, organized labor. It's very much pro-autonomous business people. It's very much towards artists. And it's very much towards solving this ecological crisis, because what we have to do is restore our ecosystems. We have to stop the assault on all of the native ecosystems that remain, and we have to plan and design to get to a much more benign society.
Okay, we are talking to Andy Caffrey, candidate for U.S. Congress, California 2nd District. I'd like to invite callers if you have questions or comments on his campaign. Phone number here is 923-3911, or if you're out of the area, 1-800-KMUD-RAD. And why don't we talk a little bit about the dynamics, this new primary system. Do you like it? Is it better or worse? I imagine there's trade-offs, but what do you think of it?
Well, it's really put me through the ringer. I started thinking about running for office back in 2006. And the reason I started to think about it is a couple of things happened. First, in 2004, I read Michael Moore's book, Dude, Where's My Country? And he has a chapter in that called The Liberal Paradise, which is about the U.S. He goes through a whole number of surveys and polls of Americans on a whole range of issues. And for the most part, Americans poll on the left of center. They're not on the right of center. That notion that this is a conservative country is only true in a certain small domain of social issues. But people are pro-labor, they're pro-women's rights, the environment, on and on and on. So that made me think, well, there's a huge potential of people who are not in the process that could be organized to be in the process. Roughly about half of the adult population is registered and turns out to vote. So in our district, we have about 700,000 people now. Roughly, what I've heard is that there are about 500,000 adults. So about 250,000 of them vote. And in 2006, I learned that 15 of the congressional races were won by Democrats by 5,000 votes or fewer. Well, I give the Netroots community credit for knocking those races into the win column for the Democrats. So that got me thinking about the power that the Netroots community actually has, because before that we knew about Howard Dean, and it was really impressive. He could raise a lot of money, but it didn't turn into votes. Howard Dean did not get the nomination and did not get elected. So I started thinking, well, if we could reach as many people using our community organizing and this Netroots activity and the various tools, things like YouTube and the social networks, in an integrated way, we could reach as many people with our media, our videos, as any millionaire candidate can reach by buying TV ads. And if you could do that, you would eliminate most of the power of money, because it's not the money that makes a difference, it's what the money is used for.
Okay, I believe we have our first caller.
Okay.
Hello, you're on the air.
Hey there, Andy.
Hey there, listener.
Mr. Caffrey, you always talk very, very intelligently. You have the right ideas. If I was a citizen, I would vote for you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Would you like to comment further? Do you have anything to add to what he's been saying?
Well, there's so much rubbish going on. There's so much rubbish talk. There's so many billions of dollars wasted each hour of each day. Please, somebody with intelligence and consciousness and compassion, please take control. I hate to see such a beautiful concept as the U.S. of A., as the People's Republic, dissolve in a hail of nonsense. So please, Andy, Mr. Caffrey, go for it, dude.
Okay.
Thank you. I intend to.
Thank you for your call. And again, that's 923-3911 or 1-800-KMUD-RAD if you'd like to call in with a question or comment. Mr. Caffrey is eager to address your questions.
I can go on, though, about the districting.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and talk about that, because we do. There is a little bit of a challenge. We are a very long, kind of cigar-shaped district with a lot of different demographics. We've got some similarities on the coast. As you say, it's a very progressive district, but we got a lot of different types of communities from here and there. But you're familiar with the communities.
Yeah, I lived in the Bay Area. I started in 1983, and I lived there for about 10 years. And I lived in San Rafael for 2 years, so I know Marin County very well. And I've also worked for the last, since the late 80s, here in Mendocino, Humboldt, Del Norte, and Trinity on various forest issues. And I've worked in Santa Rosa as well. So I have lived in this entire region of the 2nd District. And also I've lived in Southern Oregon, so I've lived in the bordering districts as well. But when I was originally going to run, it was the 1st District, and I realized that this was an extremely unique situation because the top 2 industries in the district were marijuana and wine. We had no entrenched military and no entrenched multinational corporation presence. So if it could happen anywhere, it could happen here. And we have this huge environmental population and the Back to the Land movement and the marijuana growers. So we have a whole bunch of non-traditional voters. So what happened was in 2006, I looked at how much it took for Mike Thompson to get elected to Congress, and found that he got about 80,000 votes in the Democratic primary, and then he got 2 votes for every single vote that he got in the he got 2 votes compared to the Republican for every vote the Republican got in the general election. So essentially the Democrat wins, and having been involved in these races, we knocked Bosco out. Darlene Comingore ran as an independent, and she knocked enough votes that Bosco was out, and we had Riggs, but then we put Dan Hamburg in. And so we have a way of controlling our elections here. And so out of these 500,000 adults or so, 80,000 voted for Mike in the primary, which means if somebody, and he ran unopposed, which means if somebody ran against him, they'd have to get half of that plus one. So the project became, can I organize 40,000 people plus one in this body of 500,000 adults and use these community organizations that we have in this alternative community and this Netroots media work to cross the line, the finish line there.
All right. Before we do have a caller, but before we take a caller, I should remind everybody that that we have Mr. Caffrey here, Andy here tonight. I actually intend to invite all of the candidates for following shows. I believe next show I have Susan Adams. Am I getting her name right? Okay,
yes,
thank you.
the Marin County Supervisor.
Marin County Supervisor, and I'll be extending invitations to the others as well. So none of these interviews should be construed as an endorsement from KMUD or any of its personnel, but everybody will be getting a chance to air their views on here. Now, why don't we take the question from the caller? Hello, you're on the air.
It's great to hear Andy. I really think he's the candidate for the new age because he's like way out there with the climate stuff, and he's really what we need with the ecology rather than economy, and it's just really great to hear him on there. And I just wanted to ask him to differentiate himself from Norman Solomon, because Norman Solomon has a lot of really progressive things to say, but I just think he's going to be too compromising and he's too much of a politician, and what we need is somebody like Andy who's really out there, like in a new way, because it reminds me of like the whole concept of the problems we face will not be solved by the minds that created them, and we need somebody totally different like Andy. So, Andy, what can you say about how you're better than Norman, or how you guys contrast and how you're going to do it? Thanks.
And before we get to that, we can say that nobody's asking you to go negative or anything, but apparently we have a slew of candidates coming with progressive credentials. Susan Adams is getting some backing from, I guess, what you consider the Arcata left, although there's a number of people kind of backing Norman Solomon. And there's several other candidates. There's even rumors that Gavin Newsom might be stepping in. He moved to Marin County.
He's not, though.
He's not going to?
No,
all right. And I guess Huffman is considered the most mainstream at this point, although...
he's the only one who has elected office above the county level.
So
he's the assemblyman for Marin County and Southern Sonoma.
All right. So if you would like to maybe distinguish yourselves from each of the other candidates, starting with Mr. Solomon, who obviously sort of has a reputation of being kind of a local Noam Chomsky or something of that level.
Sure. Well, I like Norman. He's a good guy. He's someone I've learned from over the years. But let's back up a little bit. Actually, there's 9 candidates now.
Okay,
an Iranian woman who has a name that I can't pronounce. I don't think I'll ever know how to pronounce it. It's that could just keep her from getting elected right there. So she's running, and apparently she's some kind of Iranian activist in the Bay Area. On what side, I don't know. But she's just entered the race this week and has just a letter up, nothing else, so it's hard to know anything about her. But of the 9 candidates, 7 live south of Santa Rosa.
Right.
So that just leaves Bill Courtney and myself from the 4 counties that were part of the first district.
I don't recognize Bill Courtney. Who's he?
Bill Courtney is a local medical marijuana doctor,
okay.
and he does research.
I'm sorry, Bill Courtney. All right.
William
I didn't
Courtney.
know he was running.
Yeah. So he and I are the only ones who really have any experience north of Santa Rosa. So the way I separate the candidates, first and foremost, is I consider the other 7 basically city candidates. These are people who've oriented their lives around the Bay Area. When Norman gave one of his first speeches as a candidate to the Progressive Democrats in Sonoma County, he was talking about how progressive the new counties that were added to his district were, and that it was really quite a progressive place, and he'd have to dig out his maps now in order to connect up here. So he doesn't really know anything, and I think that's true about all 7 of them. I mean, I've worked for 2.5 decades up here. I've worked with the logging community. I've worked with the activists. I've worked with poor people. I've worked with business people. I've worked in anti-nuclear and on Measure T and all these various community organizations. I know this place. Whether or not everyone will agree with my position, if all the loggers and Republicans will agree with me, I do know how to communicate with them and have good relationships with them. So that's the first division. So I'm calling myself the North Coast choice. And Bill, who's, again, a nice guy, and I really appreciate a lot of the environmental stuff he talks about, is really kind of a one-trick pony. He just kind of started to do this a couple of months ago. And as I said, I've been preparing now for almost 5 years. Because when I decided to do this, I realized that unlike all the other Greens who just had to prepare themselves to run a congressional race, I have to actually prepare myself to become a great congressman. And that means I have to really learn about everybody's needs and concerns. And that's not something you do in just a couple of months. And also, Bill doesn't have a background in community organizing up here at all. He gives people medical marijuana doctor recommendations, and he's doing his research in the health effects of cannabis, non-psychoactive uses, and those are great things. And he's very into wind energy, so that's him. And the other candidates, though.
Let me ask you just to focus a little bit on it too. We've noted the geographical differences, and I want to come back to that question a little bit later. But ideologically speaking, do you have differences with, say, Norman Solomon?
Yeah, that's where I was going to go next. Which is, except for the Republican Dan Roberts, everybody is a liberal or to the left of being a liberal. I mean, I've asked Norman what a progressive is, and his answer was basically the same thing that a liberal would be, which is, looking out for the poor person, providing jobs, clean environment, alternative energy, health care for people. Well, we all agree with that. In fact, if you look at the debate video from Petaluma, you find that those are like the 5 issues they all agree on: Medicare for all, alternative energy.
Who was at
ending
the debate?
wars. This was all of the candidates except for this new Iranian woman and myself, although I was a part of it in that I was allowed to have the opening 2-minute remarks. But they didn't know about me, and the other candidates who did know about me, none of them spoke up, so they didn't have an 8th chair.
All right. We do have a debate planned for the Mateel, which I believe a good number of the candidates have responded to in January.
It's going to be awesome. January 15th, Dave Sky's putting together, and it's going to be something that everyone will remember. KMUD is going to be simulcasting it. Mm-hmm. Dave is producing it like a rock concert.
Well,
in fact, the BBC might be tapping into the feed, and even Fox News. So
could be very interesting. In the meantime, you were talking about your differences with Norman Solomon on an ideological basis.
Right. So Norman is, well, actually, almost all of these other candidates are saying that they are going to fulfill the legacy of Lynn Woolsey. And they're very much associated with the movement called Progressive Democrats. And they're very involved in the organizations of that. So Susan Adams, Tiffany Renee, Norman Solomon, something strange happening with my earphones. They are all people who are part of that Bay Area Progressive Democrat movement. And Norman is proudly, I guess, a lifelong Progressive Democrat. I'm more of a fundamentalist. I'm in the Green movement, what the Germans called a Fundi. The German Green movement had originally 2 different groups. One was more like the environmental liberal Democrats, which were the Realos or the realists, the ones who were being practical. And then the more fundamental ones are the Fundis. And I'm an Earth Firster. I think with all of these major issues, we have to assess their impact on the planet first.
So Norman Solomon doesn't quite have the same
emphasis. So he's not a Green and he's not an Earth Firster. I've been involved in the Green movement, and I'm still committed to independent third-party politics. I'm running now to get in so we can change the electoral laws so people can get elected running on the Green Party ticket.
All right, we're speaking to Andy Caffrey, candidate for 2nd District Congress. We have another caller. You are on the air.
Yes, listen, I heard a number from Cal Normal that estimates $203 million spent on marijuana interdiction in California. Now, I multiplied this times 50, which I'm presuming that other states come close to spending the same amount of money. It comes to $2,650 million a year nationally. This represents a huge anti-marijuana industry, not to mention the potential profit for the 209 pharmaceutical companies who would manufacture synthetic marijuana. How would you begin to address this? It seems insurmountable. I'll take my answer off the air.
Thank you for your call.
Yeah, well, it's a great point. I don't know if the numbers work out that way, but think his point is sound. Well, I think we have to go for full legalization. I mean, President Obama is really laying down the gauntlet for us, and I'm a 215 patient myself. So when I go to D.C., if I want to take my medicine, I'll probably have to get arrested doing it. And as an Earth Firster, I'm willing to do that. So I'm willing to use my life and my role as a congressman to blow the issue open nationally so that people have to pay attention to it. I mean, I'm very much in this issue because of the prison population. I have post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm very sensitive to people who have that. And so when someone goes to jail for a long time, I think about that person and all of their loved ones getting PTSD because of that separation. So even with people who are thieves and other nonviolent criminals who do things that we generally do accept are crimes, I'm real hesitant about jailing those people, because why should everyone else in their family and their friends and other people who might need them have to pay for the crimes of this one person? So I take very seriously what medical marijuana patients need, and I take very seriously the right of anybody to smoke marijuana and not have to go through this kind of torment. So I'm just going to make it one of my top priorities, and right now I'm getting involved with the California initiative to repeal the illegality. So
although
stay
you're
tuned for
moving to Congress, if you wanted to be in Congress, is probably the right place right now, because recent activities show that it might be at this point that passing state measures is just inadequate. I think the movement probably has to finally really address it on the federal level.
Yeah, but all these things are great for getting attention. If the people of California make a statement, then it makes it easier for me to make the case to the rest of the nation.
All right. We are talking to Andy Caffrey, candidate for 2nd District Congress. Phone number, if you want to chime in, 923-3911 or 1-800-KMUD-RAD if you're out of the area. We were talking a little bit about the geography earlier, and you distinguished yourself from 7 of the other candidates by stating that they are all much more urban. But you're dealing with a district now where the bulk of the voters are Santa Rosa and South, probably about 2/3 to 3/4.
No,
correct?
it's not. It's just no. It's more like 55 to 45.
Is it? Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
But certainly Santa Rosa, San Rafael, that's probably going to get the most attention in the long run in this race. You'll be running elsewhere, but what's your strategy for running down there? Because you obviously need those votes.
Well. It's kind of interesting. One way of looking at it is you've got 7 people down there dividing roughly half of the votes. And I have a political consultant that I've hired who does polls for me. And our first poll was last month, and the results were pretty interesting. This early, 82% naturally are undecided about who they want to vote for. But we asked them, if you were to vote today, who would you vote for? First place was Jared Huffman, the assemblyman, with 9%. Now, he is the assemblyman for that part of the district. So half of the district has had him for 5 years and knows him, yet he couldn't get 1 out of 5 of those people to say that they would vote for him, which means he's got kind of a top limit that's pretty low. Second place was Susan Adams with 3%. I was third with 2%. Norman Solomon fourth with 1%. And at that time, there were only 2 more candidates, and they both had 0.5%, Stacey Lawson and Tiffany Renee. We just did another poll last week, and it's the same for all of them, except that Huffman went up 1 more point to 10, Adams went up 1 more point to 4, and I went up 2 points to 4. So I'm now tied for second. The only person ahead of me is Huffman. And then yesterday, someone pointed out that this magazine in Nevada, The Patch, has a poll, and I'm in first place in this poll in Nevada. So people are seeing this Netroots thing is working out, because we did this debate in Petaluma, and it's been online. And I did an interview here on KMUD, and we've made videos and audio recordings of those. Those go online. And then Daniel Mintz did a great story on the debate, and that was turned into a print version, which was printed last week just before our polls in the Independent, I believe it was. So it's about getting out into the community and reaching people through the channels of community organizings and local unions and again, reaching as many people. And up here, I'm the only one really going around. If you look around town, I have the only poster up. These people are focusing their battle on the South, and that's what they know, so they feel kind of weak coming up
Although
here.
we did have visits from Solomon and Adams briefly, and she is, again, coming up next month. She will be on my show next month.
Well, they've also, Huffman, Adams, and Solomon have all raised over $200,000 so far. And the rest of us are in the 5 and 4 figures.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, I have 4 times as many people now saying that they will support me as Norman has. So it's not a matter. I mean, the thing is, Norman is not better than me on a single issue, to a progressive, to a green, to a liberal, or even to a centrist or Republican. But I'm better than him on a lot of issues, especially ecological issues, especially a lot of the personal community issues like homelessness, and especially the rural issues. Like, what do you do in an economy that's not as complex as something like the Bay Area, where you don't have as many opportunities to build things, new things in the economy? We can't just, expect we're going to bring a computer industry up here or build an automobile or a train plant up here. It's quite a different situation.
Actually, Oracle did look at Samoa, but on just to remind you, we are talking to Andy Caffrey, candidate for Congress. Phone number is 923-3911 or 1-800-KMUD-RAD. We're talking, but earlier you were. Oh, we have a caller. I'm sorry. I'm at the wrong angle here. Let me move. Hello, you're on the air.
We also had a caller that didn't want to go on the air, but wanted to remind you or ask you about Santa Rosa. They didn't think that Santa Rosa was in this district.
It is not.
Okay.
Oh, it's not?
No. Santa Rosa and the east part of Sonoma County are in Mike Thompson's district.
Okay, that's a big chunk of votes.
So picture a C, okay? You just put a C over Sonoma County, and the part that's covered by the C is the part that we have.
Why didn't they just give us Santa Rosa and direct
Well,
some of
you
Marin
see, they
County
should have.
south?
You see, because this is really a problem because except for the fact that I do have experience in the Bay Area, if somebody else from up here who didn't have experience was up there, I don't think they could really do a good job fully representing the interests of those urban people. And, of course, I've been arguing that the opposite is especially true.
No,
So it really should not have included Marin County. It should have gone down to Santa
Of course,
Rosa.
there were a number of proposals. You could have been traveling over to Reading to campaign, but which would have been interesting. All right, you're on the air?
Hi, I'd like to turn the show towards foreign policy, if I could.
Sure.
I'd like to ask the candidate for his opinion of the successful revolution in Libya. I know that a lot of Greens have been very vocal in their opposition to Barack Obama and NATO's support for the revolution in Libya. But tonight, we all know that Gaddafi is finally dead after 42 years. No American soldiers died in this effort. I can't think of a military operation that has been more successful than our support for the revolution in Libya. And what is your opinion on what happened?
And before you answer, let me just point out, it is possible to support a revolution but oppose intervention on its behalf. But
as we all recall, if we did not intervene, Gaddafi would have remained in power. It took our intervention to make this happen.
Or possibly massacred the city. But that's all worth. But Mr. Caffrey will address the issue.
Well, of course, decades ago, we could have gotten rid of Gaddafi by just embargoing Libya. It's because Gaddafi was useful to the oil interests, of all of the industrial countries, not just the U.S., in fact, particularly for Europe, that Gaddafi was allowed to remain. In fact, just 5 or 6 years ago, he made this deal that, he'd dismantle all of his weapon systems and let the Europeans and the Americans come in and check it out, and suddenly he was a good guy. He'd be forgiven. So the way I look at it as we have this system where we prop up these puppets, and then when it becomes convenient for us or they become too inconvenient, a lot of people don't realize that Saddam Hussein actually had quite a socialist system set up of maintaining the structures of the middle class. Of all the Middle East Arab nations, it had the highest standard of living. It was the most like us. Now, I'm not saying we should not have gotten rid of Saddam Hussein. I'm saying that the whole Bush war was wrong. The whole maintaining of empire was wrong. And we can get caught up in looking into these individual cases. I mean, Saddam Hussein did do horrible things. He did gas the Kurds. But then, Rumsfeld and I guess it was Bush 1 administration, the ones who gave him the precursor chemicals to make them. So I think what we have to do is not be the police of the world and use that as a justification for what we're really doing, which is maintaining an empire to maintain corporate control of the economies of the rest of the world. And we have banking policies that do the same thing. And in fact, now the European countries are going to be facing the same austerity measures that we've been imposing on the third world through the World Bank and the IMF. And the same thing is probably going to start to happen with states like California. So we have to look at this at a systemic level and change it on that level.
His question was, do you support the Libyan revolution, and did you support Obama's and NATO's intervention on its behalf? And then two prongs to the question.
Well, I guess my short answer would be no, because of the second part, which is, can you trust these people? Can you trust the situation to be what they say it is? Can you trust that Saddam Hussein, that Osama bin Laden was sort of shot in sort of self-defense, or was he just executed so he couldn't speak out about his relationships with the Bush family and the rest? So, again, I can't isolate it. I'd have to be in Congress and look at the information that shows exactly what was happening. This was done, to protect potential violence at that point from Gaddafi?
Yeah, Ms. Rod, I think it was the city. He was outside threatening to follow him into their closets and kill him, and that gave an opening.
Yeah, and look what's happening in Egypt right now. I mean, we think get rid of these tyrants, but people like Tito held Yugoslavia together, and once he was gone, the whole Balkan situation disintegrated. So you have to actually come up with, what is something that's better that you're going to replace it with? Not just think about taking out somebody, because you're bringing on chaos. I mean, look at Afghanistan. I knew we were going to lose the war in Afghanistan the day we started, because I knew there were thousands of different subcultures in that nation that had existed for 5,000 years. They hated each other, and it was like taking a bat on a hornet's nest. There was no way it could ever be put back together.
So maybe I could, and just maybe correct me if I'm wrong, it's your position is that you're skeptical of the necessity for intervention, and you're kind of wait and see as to whether or not you support the Libyan revolution to see who is actually in power and what they're doing.
In a general sense, I support democratic resistance movements against any kind of tyranny of the left or the right. But again,
but it's not clear to you what the nature of this particular rebellion is yet?
Yeah, I mean, again, why was this, of all the places of the world, so important to President Obama? I don't know. I heard that Gaddafi had sort of was blackmailing a lot of the oil interests into basically giving him a lot more money. So it could be that was the reason that he was getting out of hand, and that's why he was taken out. Well, we're seeing that people, the Coptic Christians are being shot and mowed over by the army in Egypt. Who knows what's going to happen in Libya? They don't have democratic traditions there, and they do have lots of different tribes. And I definitely don't buy any of the stuff that Fox is putting out about Muslim Brotherhood and stuff. But again, you look at the Soviet Union. When that broke, there was not something to replace it. And you have Chechnya, and you have all kinds of other problems there. So it's really, I think, about we have to get out of this predatory capitalism, get out of we will support a regime because they let us do what we want to do, and start to think in terms of what makes all of these places well. What is it that can be supported to make these places become whole as they can be? And if they can't be made whole, maybe they should be decentralized and broken down into other smaller countries.
All right. We have another caller, and you're on the air.
Hi.
Hi.
I'd kind of like to bring things back to a local perspective.
Okay.
Well, I met Andy recently while at Richardson Grove, and I'm wondering, now that we don't have any rail service, and since many of us want to keep Richardson Grove pristine and a small road, what do you think about barging and shipping into Humboldt through the ocean and through the bay to get our basic needs taken care of and any manufacturing products coming and going?
Short sea shipping, so to speak, up and down.
Yeah, well, it's something I've not studied at all, but it sounds right. It's something I've been thinking about, wondering if that's the way to go. Do you have an opinion on it?
Well, I don't see putting the rail back. I used to want to have the rail, but now that's a dead issue for me as far as the environmental impacts that the railroad would have.
It's just physically not possible.
Right.
Right. And since we're not going to grow to be a mega business area like on a Highway 5, we don't really need a super highway coming and going.
Right.
So I'm thinking that's the only solution is through our port.
Yeah. I guess I have to say I'm with you on it. I don't think we can do any more expansion. We can't do anything more going to the south. And I think probably most of our commerce is going to be with Southern Oregon and, the coastal counties to our south.
Right.
Okay. All right.
Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you,
Thanks for
caller.
calling.
If anybody wants to...
We had a caller that wanted to ask Andy what committee you would like to be on.
Well, there are a number of them. I've just started looking into it more. Of course, natural resources, but I'm very interested in the Intelligence Committee. I really want to know what's going on with this domestic spying because that's something else that I didn't mention that in the list of major issues that I'm concerned about. But that's definitely up there. That's part of the prosecuting the Bush administration. Let's see, what else?
Yeah, Ways and Means. Go for it.
Yeah, go for the big one. I had a list of them, and I can't think of them right now.
All right. Well, there's there's
energy would be one. Energy, natural resources, intelligence, perhaps some defense-oriented ones, but you can. I mean, there's so many. I'd want to be able to have influence on probably 20 of them because they deal with the issues that I've outlined here and that are of concern to the people in our district.
Would you join the Progressive Caucus?
Yes, but I'm also thinking about starting a Green Caucus or a Planetary Survival Caucus, something like that. My thinking was originally a Green Caucus, but then I started thinking about trying to get a caucus around other people who could get behind the notion that we have to do this major conversion to deal with the climate crisis and the ecological crisis. So that's why I'm thinking more in terms of something focused on that.
Sure. All right. The phone number is 923-3911, 1-800-KMUD-RAD. We have a few minutes left if you want to call in, and we have another caller, and you're on the air.
Yeah, I feel that possibly, everything has been discussed and it's all good. But if you go back to, let's say, the container ships coming into Eureka, trying to bring stuff in instead of doing Richardson Grove, let's say, having all the big rigs coming in that way. Well, you know what? I know dang well, for the length of time that I live here, there's going to be at least half of the population of Southern Humboldt's going to complain about, we got container ships coming in, now we're going to have diesel spills. And you know what? This is the only area where, I guarantee you, we can all talk this till we're all blue in the face, whether it's the Eel River or anything else, or whether it's railroad banking or anything like that. Nothing's ever going to come to it because it's always, you do one thing to please somebody else, well, that just rubbed that person the wrong way. It's just not going to happen. I don't see container ships or anything like that coming in the Eel River anytime soon. I mean, in the Eureka anytime soon because they'll be complaining about that. They're having problems just trying to get the dock situations cleaned up where they could even do anything to think about it.
Well, keep in mind, I'm talking about moving towards a more localized economy, so it wouldn't be as dependent upon external commerce like that. And also, you have to keep in mind there's other kinds of ship vehicles that can be designed, and we're not losing the highway through Richardson Grove. I mean, we still have that available for whatever vehicles, we're going to use in this new ecotopian reality. So we can still go down Highway 101.
Yeah, I mean, I understand how everybody feels because I feel the same way about cutting down the redwoods in Richardson Grove. But if you think about this, think about when they first built 101 and the trees they cut to the trees they left, all right?
Yeah.
It didn't hurt the ones they left. So if they made it a little bit wider, get off it. It's not going to hurt a couple more trees off the side because when they made the roads originally, it didn't hurt what was left.
But we're having a changing climate.
It's going to hurt one more off the side. I mean, that's kind of retarded, I think. I mean, I've been here a long time, enough to see how things are, and people are just so narrow-minded around here because they're like, but this is the last bastion of the killer redwoods, unless you go into above Kern County, and you get the other redwoods there.
But the redwoods don't have very deep roots. The only way they can stand up is by living in intact forests with intact canopies. And since that's the way it's been, they didn't evolve deep root systems. So when you fragment the forest, and I think Richardson Grove itself is already small and vulnerable as it is.
Yeah,
when you get,
again, you're saying what I'm trying, what I'm saying is you're saying, if you touch the roots, well, just think about it. They made 101 through Richardson Grove back in the day, and when they took out just those few trees to make the blacktop that's there now, it didn't hurt the shoulder trees. So if they made it a little bit wider, where do you think it's going to hurt the shoulder tree on that aspect right there, other than maybe getting rid of the last 4 on the right-hand side of the road?
well, okay, you're entitled to your opinion. I disagree with you, and I also disagree with the premise that the other trees weren't harmed. I call it Avenue of the Spike Tops,
Yeah, but look at the roads the way they are right now for all the redwoods they took to put 101 all the way to friggin' Oregon.
But you also had more intact forest at that point. Okay,
Yeah,
it's much more fragmented now, and so the winds that come off of the coast, up near Petroleum and stuff, they get up to 130, 140 miles per hour, and yet in the old-growth forest, the wind rarely gets above 4 or 5 miles per hour. So you open up that canopy, and you have roots that are designed to hold trees in place if the wind's only 4 or 5 or maybe 10 miles per hour, not 100 or more miles per hour. So when we get these multi-year storms because of the climate crisis and the changes that have been made, we're talking about a whole new ecological regime, and all bets are off as far as what's kept things going to date.
Hey, listen, thank you for your call. It's actually very thoughtful, and it's good to engage. We do have another caller we want to try to fit in after you, okay? Thanks. Hello, you're on the air.
Hey, thanks. Eureka has never historically been, has always been supported by the timber industry. That's been its resource. And now that the timber industry isn't going to promote growth in Humboldt County anymore as a business. And we're landlocked and isolated, so it's hard for us to be a producer of goods or a shipping port. And I would like to just mention that there are other alternatives towards vitalizing this economy besides trying to rely upon low-level labor jobs and shipping and port industry, and that is. If we do what Boise did, they're out in the middle of Idaho, and what they do is they attracted a lot of, thought and, information type industries, design firms, things like that, and became, kind of like an offshoot for Silicon Valley type orientated companies to work at. And we could do that in, advertise and promote the community as, favoring, educational, grant projects as being a place where people can work on stuff like that. And if we improved, instead of improving our ports, we improved our social services and made it more attractive for people to want to come and raise families in a digital age where they don't need to commute to offices every day. And if we look to the future, then sorry, I don't mean to ramble.
That's all right. I do have to say, I think I've seen more logs in the past year or so on trucks than I have in the past 12 years. I don't know where they're going. I understand a number of them are being shipped as logs overseas, but it is still part of the economy. I don't know that it's going to expand the local economy significantly, but you want to
I can't tell you exactly what the new economy is going to be like. Again, I advocate a process that we go through where we decide as a community what to do. I'm very much a we candidate. My expertise comes from having, at Facebook I have at least 1,000 of my 3,000 friends are activists that I've worked with for decades in all of these different areas. And so I see myself as a kind of facilitator bringing all of this expertise together, and likewise all of the expertise of the people who live in the 2nd District. It's about us deciding what we're going to do, and we have not psychologically taken responsibility for running our own affairs governmentally. And that's the change that I think we have to do, because if we don't, the Democrats have shown that they are not going to save us from the Republicans, and the Republicans have shown that almost to a person, these elected Republicans are psychopaths. They have no conscience. They will lie every single day, and they will bring down the government, and they're bringing down the economy. The economy's dying because of the wealth concentration. In the late 1970s, the top 1% had 9% of the income of the nation. Now it's 23.5%. Okay? They've sucked all of that wealth out of the middle class, and that's that middle class wealth that has allowed the consumer society to go on this this long, and that's not coming back. So we don't know what we're going to have in the future, because all of the stuff we want to export, there's got to be a market of people buying it. And if these guys keep giving tax cuts to the rich, they're just going to continue the process of sucking the wealth out of the middle class.
All right, real quickly, do you have a website, anything you want to give out?
I do. CaffreyForCongress.org, CAFFREY. And there's a Andy Caffrey for Congress 2012 Facebook group page. And I'm in the phone book here in Garberville if you want to give me a call. I'm going to start doing community meetings, and I'd love to connect up with you.
And where are your videos available?
And I have YouTube channels. I've got a Caffrey for Congress one, an Andy Caffrey one, and all of that you can find by going to CaffreyForCongress.org, and you'll see Andy TV and all kinds of things like that. So please check that out. It's a very interesting website.
All right. Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Sue Maloney, for engineering, and thank you, callers, for some very thoughtful calls. Good luck in your campaign, Andy.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks, Sue. Bye-bye.